Les jeunes go, oh, oh, behadenste. Les jeunes go, tegen go, behadenste. Hey, yana, hey, 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 yana. Les jeunes go, oh, oh, yours.
When I hear the phrase "awołí," I think of when you are out cheering and you're trying to catch one of those last withers, and he flies through the air, headbutts you in the eye, leaves you with a nice bruiser, and then you continue cheering. You get it done. You figure out a way to make it work despite everything that may be mounting against you. That's what I think about. And then you plan the next butchering.
Man, there's a song from Bruce Springsteen, and it's our anthem song because when we're down and out, I put that song on, and it says there's going to be hard times coming, there's going to be good times coming, but there's also going to be hard times coming. Swing that ball at me because I'm going to grab it and I'm going to work hard. I'm going to work as hard as I can to do what needs to be done. It's just being honest and upfront and working your butt off. Bring that wrecking ball on is all I can say, and that's what the word is that.
My name is Christine Ami. I am the Navajo Cultural Arts Grant Manager. We are here today with Navajo Weaver Marlowe Katoney. I kind of want to explain my little get up before we get going, but you guys won't be focusing your attention on me. Hopefully you'll be focusing all your attention on Marlowe. I had an incident. We were shearing yesterday. We're almost done shearing, and we're going in to catch our last one of our last sheep for the day, and I got headbutted by a flying sheep. So I'm covering it up so that you guys don't have to stare at it. At the same time, I know it's really distracting, but I'm hoping that Marlowe and his wonderful story that he's going to be sharing with us today will kind of take away from the distraction of my face. So sorry for the distraction, and welcome, Marlowe. We're so glad that you were able to join us. A little bit of a background. Marlowe has a background in both contemporary painting as well as Navajo weaving, and he's had tremendous amount of success at many of the Indian markets in the Southwest region, abroad, and nationally and internationally. So it's wonderful to have him here. He is joining us from Winslow, Arizona. I met Marlowe, I think, I met Marlowe through the internet, Facebook. When I first started weaving, I was kind of tracking him. He was on Facebook, and he was putting out there, his process of how he was going about learning weaving. And at that time, I was in graduate school, so I was just learning to reconnect to anybody who was weaving at the time, and he was one of the first people, at least that in my circle, who was presenting himself. And I remember contacting him and be like, Marlowe, how do I do these turns? I'm getting stuck on some of my turns. Can you help me out? My birds are starting to come out, fat little short angry birds. And so I remember that was my first initial contact with Marlowe, and since then it's been wonderful to see Marlowe go through all the economic and commercial success as a Navajo weaver. So we would love for you to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Marlowe Katoney, and before I begin, I wanted to I am very thankful to be able to speak to this group today. And, I grew up in northern Arizona, near Dilcon, at a place called Sunflower Butte. Part of my story is, I didn't grow up traditional. So it was really hard. So I only know how to introduce myself, that I come from, I'm Katoneys, born for Sheen. And so, yeah. And so I didn't grow up on the reservation. I grew up in town. And growing up, both of my parents worked. My mom worked at a car dealership, and my dad worked for the then at the time it was the Santa Fe Railroad. And so that was my experience growing up. So I had two working parents, and so I spent a lot of time at home in town by myself. And so that was part of the problem when I didn't grow up traditional like everybody else did. And so, and mostly I spoke primarily English. Growing up, you pick up some stuff along the way, and I'm a little bit better at it now, but it wasn't until when my parents separated, it must have been around about 11 or 12, and we started spending a lot more time on the reservation. And so my masana, she was very nurturing. So what she would do is sometimes during the afternoons after we got everything done on a hot summer afternoon, I used to take a nap on the bed, and I used to hear her weaving comb in the background, but I used to watch her. So that was my first experience with weaving. But as an artist, I think I've always gravitated towards art. And a lot of those times within my solitude, after my parents had separated, I would spend a lot of time, I went into books. And so that's what led me to pictorial weaving. As most of you may know, whenever you're weaving a pictorial rug, you're kind of giving a narrative about what's going on and what's going on with art. Well, I guess you couldn't, I didn't call it art then, but then I started painting before that. So the two kind of worked hand in hand together, and that's like color coordination, color theory, and different concepts about about art I was learning along the way, like contour, chiaroscuro, and those were all things that led me into what I do now. I mean, I can't really tell you what I do, but just I go by instinct. So how is that?
I think that that's
Or
great.
do you have
Great.
another question for that?
No, of course. I think that that's a very solid introduction in terms of introducing the fact that not all Navajo artisans start off with that traditional basis, but that we can use the arts as an intercept in order to reconnect and to create these magnificent new designs and outreach to other peoples. And so I appreciate that. So if you could tell us a little bit about your painting background, what was your painting background with?
Well, you know what? Growing up, growing up here in Winslow, my dad always interested in art. He used to paint on the side, but he used to always pick up Southwest Art and art magazines, and that's when I started to get interested into art. And then he worked as a brakeman for the railroad, so sometimes when he was at home, he would start a picture and he would have me finish it. And he said, let me see what you've done when you got back. So that was my first introduction to art. And after that, growing up in school, in elementary school, teachers and students, in school used to think that I was a good artist, and I never really thought twice about it. But that was kind of like an early sign that I was probably going to go into art. To be quite truthful, when I got into like 6th grade or so, 7th grade, I thought I was going to do something else. But I just kept gravitating towards art, and I excelled at it. But I started painting from very, very early on, and I started selling my paintings at the ages of 7, 8, 9, and so forth. But that was, I knew I could make money from art. So that's what I started to do. And, I painted throughout high school. I took some awards from very early on at the Heard Museum because my art instructors were very encouraging. They wanted to encourage that in me. Even though I may have not went into that field, but I started winning awards. And then when I got into, when it came to my senior year, I decided to go into art. But part of that was I discovered artists along the way, like Ellen Hauser, Charles Lolema, Harvey Begay. I think it's Harrison Begay. But yeah, all of those artists. And Narcisco Abeda. And I got really into, I was drawn into it. So I knew that that was something I wanted to do. But by the time I had graduated from high school, I was already doing large scale paintings. And so I went to the University of Arizona and I was introduced to a lot of outside work, which was Native American art. And luckily, I made connections with all of them, and they've nurtured what I've done so far from very early on. One of my earliest experiences is I went to my first painting class, and I was already doing painting and whatnot. And I hadn't painted with oil paints before. And one of my professors in that first painting class, Barbara Penn, she had she seen that I was very spare with the paint, and she kind, I think she kind of knew I knew what I was doing, and I was in my comfort zone. And what she had done is she took all my paintbrushes away and she splotched all the paint on the palette, and then she gave me a palette knife and she says, now paint. So, you know, stepping outside of your comfort zone is one of the most important things about becoming an artist, because you have to really push yourself to do something different. And I think that was what happened with painting, between the transition from painting to weaving. And I always painted and I always drew to some extent, but it wasn't until maybe about 10 years ago, I was working at Winslow Indian Healthcare Center, and the job was stressful, and being around sick people was really hard, because, you know, they can't help that they're upset, that they can't be seen like right there on the spot. So that really stressed me out quite a bit. But I decided that that wasn't going to be the field for me. So I ended up quitting. And that's when my grandmother said, you should try weaving. And so my grandma was always a Ganado red weaver. And she had set up that first loom for me, and it was a small rug, very small, but it still took me about 6 months to weave. And then I got determined after that first rug that I was going to learn how to weave. And I think that's when I got introduced into the rug auctions. And the first one that I went to was at the Museum of Northern Arizona. And then I did some other ones after that. But I started to sell rugs like right and left. And what I had done to get a price point for my work was I took an average of all my weavings, and then the square footage of the rugs. And then that's how I started pricing my work. But it was amazing. One of the first rugs I had made, I sold at in Moab, Utah, at the Canyonlands rug auction. And that was the rug that I sold for the most at the time. And it was $1,200. And I was amazed. Because before that, my rugs had only been going for like maybe $100, $200, but that's about it. But that's where I started. And one of the things that I always stress to up and coming artists, not just weavers, is building relationships with museums, with people that know you know, and getting your foot in the door. Once you have the foot in the door, then you're able to establish that, and you can make it as an artist. Whereas sometimes I see some artists, they say maybe sell 1 or 2 paintings, but they don't make an effort to try to build those relationships with the museums. And remembering names is one of the most important things. And then what they do. Recently, I was kicking myself in the butt because there's people that I had met that I didn't know what they did or who they were, and they weren't important people in the Arizona art community. And I started to back then I was really on top of it, but recently I slipped a little bit. But I think that's one of the most important things you have to do as an artist. But also, as a Navajo weaver, aside from painting, I think it's a good it's a cultural art, but it's also a fine art. And you are putting your work out there in the world as telling about your culture, and that's important. And everybody has a different story.
I think that, no, thanks for sharing that, Marlo. I guess my next question is, you talk about your experiences with the rug auctions. Can you give us a little bit more information about how those auctions function and how that was kind of your foot in the door?
Well, I started buying my stuff from RB Burnham Trading Company. Then I would drop out the rugs there. And what they would do is they would put an opening bid on the price for the rug, and that sparks interest, and it goes from there. And it always starts small, but I think up and coming weavers, you have to find a starting place. You can't start from the top, and then your rugs will gradually, you can't be discouraged. I've made it this far, and I have I'm not a rich person by any means, but I have a decent income from weaving.
I guess what would you consider, you talk about, the significance of getting that aha, foot in the door moment for you. What do you think that that foot in the door, when did you know that was you were in, and that you were going to be able to make a career out of this?
It was probably, let me see, I would have to say it was the rug that I did from the Canyonlands for their rug auction in Moab, Utah. Being able to get $1,200 from one rug, that was amazing for me. And then people started to take interest in it. But it's it's a daily thing. Sometimes you don't feel as great when you're making a piece, and it's like when you get to a certain point on your rug, that's the aha, and you find it through, and you start doing work. But people will pay attention, and then people like with this interview, and people start taking interest in what you're doing, and then that's encouragement within itself. But I always encourage people to pray before you get to the loom, and pray when you're done, and that's important.
Yeah, it's curious that you say that. As part of the Navajo Cultural Arts Program, often we go down to the herd, and we're going to talk about your herd experience. For those of you guys who are joining on, we have Marlowe Katoney here with us, Weaver, a Navajo painter, about the concept of prayer, because when we were down there, we had brought one of our Navajo Cultural Arts business classes down there to talk with Bruce McGee from originally, right? He came from the Keams Trading Post, and one of the things that Bruce was pointing out was that he noticed that people who brought in their pieces and that had that, connection, that spiritual connection to, whatever realm of religious or spiritual connection that they had, when they put that into their pieces, especially if they're Navajo people, they noticed that their pieces sold. And I remember him saying that because it really brought back that concept of holistic well-being that's associated with our cultural arts innately. And so I think that that's really interesting that you point that out. Now, jumping back to the herd, one of the big breaks that I saw, at least from my perspective, for Marlowe's work, is that Angry Birds weaving that you had the experience of not only showcasing, but they built an entire exhibit around that piece. If you could talk a little bit about the inspiration of that and your experience working with the herd.
Okay, when I broke away from doing rug auctions and I started getting into marketplaces, they have a weavers market, and it's usually, I think it's the last weekend in November. And then I had taken 2 rugs there, and that's when I got to meet Anne Marshall and Diana Pardue. And they actually, I was surprised because I had set my prices and at a decent price of what I thought was comfortable with, like the average. And right away they purchased it, that rug. And so after that, they started like, I don't know what it was about that rug. That rug for a lot of people is really, people are drawn to it. And that rug, I have gotten more mileage out of that rug than anything else. And then the following year, they bought another rug. So that was 2 rugs in the museum collection. And then recently at the Herd Museum, this past March, I knew that Anne Marshall was trying to get in touch with me. And she's, for people who don't know who she is, she's the chief curator at the Herd Museum. And so all this time that I've been going to rug auctions, selling rugs here and there, I didn't know there was a couple from California who have been buying my rugs, and I really don't know how many rugs that they have, but the gentleman passed away, I guess at the end of last year, and they donated half of their rug collection to the Herd Museum. And the herd went through the entire rug collection, and they found 4 of my rugs, and they took all of them. And then, yeah, and then it's just it's been an ongoing thing. It's I guess you could say art is one of those things that it can be very adventurous if you're optimistic about it and you keep your head up even when you don't have sales, because it's the tough times that make you appreciate the good times. And one of the things that I was gonna tell you about is several years ago, some of the weavers that I really look up to, I think there's too many to name a few, but I'll start with Barbara Rogers and Linda Taylor Pete, and who's, I think is going to be part of your lecture series later. But I didn't know a lot of things about the rug weaving. I just know that I used to do it. But at the end, when they're cutting the cords to make them even, I didn't know that was it. For your umbilical cord, that stood for your umbilical cord. And then they end with a prayer. So that's kind of where I got that from, the idea of praying for your rugs, like before you part with them or sell them.
Very cool. So you brought up some individuals who inspired your work that were weavers. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those individuals who have? You spoke about your grandmother, a little bit about Linda P. Anybody else who has impacted you?
Um, you know, one of the things that we always talk about is with Navajo weaving is you'll hear weavers talk about generational weaving, and that's passed down from grandma, mom, and then you, and so on and so forth. But I think, in my view, and looking at Navajo weaving, I think that's really hard to distinguish for me, because Navajo weaving has been so embedded in Navajo culture. I mean, we have origin stories about it. So it's always been with us, and it's always something that all families have done. There might have been a break in generations as of late within, when kids went to boarding schools and whatnot, but it's always been with us.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Marla, for once again just like highlighting the possibilities, right, of these future generations. Even if you don't have that experience, there's always a way for you to get started in these traditional realms that also cross with the contemporary, right, the contemporary arts. I kind of want to bring that up. You briefly brought it up for just a second about perhaps some of the tensions or the connections between the cultural arts with weaving and, let's say, what's been considered more fine arts, for example, painting. Where do you see the connections of those fine arts and the cultural arts coming into dialogue?
Well, you know what? Okay, 1950s, 1960s, there was recently two exhibitions of Joseph Albers, and he was one of those the New York painters who was coming out to the Southwest at that time, and he started collecting Navajo rugs. And then what he did was he sold them to other artists in New York City and other people in New York City, and that was one of the takeoffs of modern painting in New York. So they exist hand in hand, but it's how you treat your art, I guess you could say, if that makes sense. It's you have to consider it an art when you're doing it, not just something you're going to go and sell. You have to take pride in each piece and complete it from beginning to end, and I you have to respect it as an art in order to understand it. And people started to see that in the outside world, and even with all other Native American art or indigenous art, um, modern art has really taken off from those ideas, but it was just never respected as much, just coming from that. But now we're coming to we've begun to open that door, so it's beginning to change.
Where do you see that change going in your own work? Do you see, for those of you guys who are joining us, Marlowe is very well known in the Navajo weaving and contemporary arts world for his pictorial weavings and his ability to create very lifelike, in my description, right, photographic imagery onto his textiles. Where do you see your work going from here?
You know what? Everything is always changing, and since I started to revisit painting again, I've noticed my artwork has started to change again. But you know what? The sky's the limit. I always tell people you can't pigeon yourself into one hole. Um, the course of an artist starts very small. When you begin to do your artwork, it will always change, and it should, because that change is it's going to make you better, and you have to try different mediums. And people try to understand what I'm able to do with my artwork, but I tell them that I can sculpt, and I can paint, and I can weave, and I'm constantly looking at everything. Pop culture is very important. Um, One of the biggest things as narrative that I see in pictorial weaving is it speaks about a particular era and time, and I don't think we've really tapped into that, or I don't think a lot of Native American weavers have tapped into that. And one of the reasons why is, people who collected rugs back in the day, they have collected so many rugs, and they already know what they like. And so it's kind of gotten stuck in that one position. But if you think about it, Native American or Navajo weavers have always been innovative, trying new things, especially after 1868 after Vasco Redondo, when they were introduced to new kinds of wool. They were trying new things, and that experimentation is alive and well. And so the sky's the limit.
I think that experimentation also brought you to the academic realm, right? Marlowe is a SAR School of Advanced Research Fellow, and so I think that we had in our first lecture series, Jared, who is an MFA student, so he's bringing that Navajo cultural arts force right directly into the limelight of ceramics, right? That ceramic threshold. Lyndon a couple weeks ago spoke about the significance and importance of that creative vibe of not getting stuck and completely being on top of your game and changing your game up. And I think that you're saying the same thing, Marlowe. So could you tell us a little bit about how you got that SAR, like what inspired you to reach out and apply for those SAR fellowships, and what did you do during your time there?
You know what? I didn't know about it. Um, I was invited, and I had to apply twice, and I didn't get it the first time, so I got it the second time. But I was really, the piece that I was working on was a pieta, and um, pieta in Italian means pity, and I hadn't seen, except for Shanto Begay having created a pieta before. And the pieta is something that's iconic in Native American art, or no, excuse me, in European art. But I hadn't seen that on the rug before, so I wanted to put that on a rug. And so I never completed it. And I still want to complete it, but it's going to take some time. And right about that time, I was at the University of Arizona. I was at the University of Arizona. I was still living in Tucson. And several of my friends started to pass away, just from different things. Um, and it kind of scared me because, you know, life is short. And so that's what that rug was about, was the pieta. And that's what I was working on. And I had done some paintings like that before, and some of them I lost track of, but that was the basis of that project.
How was it over the fellowship that you applied for? What was the specific title of that fellowship that you had there?
It's called the King Fellowship. The King Fellowship.
Mhm.
And it was only for 3 months.
Okay, so there's a short fellowship, but definitely a worthy endeavor, and I'm glad that you got a chance to reapply. I think a lot of artists sometimes get a little downtrodden when they don't get those first initial acceptances into these types of academic areas in order to just create and to study at the same time. And I'm glad that you applied again. That's that kind of sense that when we talk about Kyle with it bit, that you don't give up and you just keep trying and you try harder and you try until you get where you need to go. So I appreciate that you were able to.
Well, you know what? Like, I think with fellowships and grants, you have to apply for everything. And you may get 2 or 1 or none, but you just have to keep at it. And I think that a lot of this is something I wanted to cover that I didn't discuss before, but when you're an artist and you're trying to make it in the art world, you really have to learn how to talk about your artwork, and you have to try to discuss it, write it down. Even if you're on your own, that's a discipline you have to do. And then also keeping a working resume, and then a biography of your life is not your artist statement. An artist statement is something completely different, and museums will recognize it that way.
So keeping a resume, you suggest is a really great facet, an ongoing resume, but also understanding what a artist, the difference between, let's say, like an artist statement and an artist biography, because those are also two different things that
Yes.
that the art world asks for when you submit your work. Awesome. That's some really great advice. I guess we're going to start to wrap up a little bit. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and send it to our feed. Crystal is on the line and she's tracking any questions that you may have for Marlowe. But while we wait for those to come in, I guess one of the questions that we have from the cultural arts program is, how do you see your art serving your community, your Navajo community?
I had this discussion with somebody just the other day, and it's so weird. I mean, I didn't know people would. I mean, with social media and stuff like that, how you utilize it? they 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 follow my work. They know what it is, but there comes a point in that point where it's just you stop becoming a private person and you become a public person, and you have to be able to uphold that, I guess, and it can be stressful, but where I don't know, it's just it's a very funny question for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're talking about a different level of fame, and I know it sounds funny to talk about it at that capacity. I know that, like, for example, I looked up to you, and I still continue to look up to you, watching your career go. Um, where do you see? I guess one of the last questions that we have for you is, what kind of advice and encouragement could you offer to your younger Navajo artists that are up and coming? They could be weavers, they could be in any genre.
I would say self-esteem, and to realize that what you are doing is second to nothing. It belongs to you, and it comes from your heart, and that's what you're putting out there.
Yeah, I think that's definitely. I really love the way that you speak about that holistic components of how your work, whether it be in painting or in weaving, that's one of the primary focuses that you always seem to come back to, at least in our short interview. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us, Marlowe, while we still have you on the line?
Um, you know what? I can't think of anything.
Nothing right now.
I always, when I do these interviews, I always get really nervous. And today I wasn't feeling very well. So, yeah, so I had to like really think about what the questions he had put out there on when he sent them to me earlier. And I always get that way when I'm trying to give advice or tell people about what I do. It's then you're jumping back and forth. So I hope this is cohesive for most people to understand.
Yeah, we do have one comment coming in from our Facebook Live interface. People want to know if you have any pieces up on the loom right now that you would be willing to share.
Um, I have one piece on the loom,
Or any pieces that you may have.
and it's not very. It's not very big, but you know what? You can get onto Facebook. You can Google me, or one of the social media sites, and then you can see quite a bit of the work I've done so far. The one that I'm working on right now, I'm not too impressed with, just because when I put the color combinations together, it wasn't coming together like I wanted it to. And let me see if I can show you. Can you see that?
Yep, we
Are
see it.
you able to see? Yeah. So I wasn't too impressed with the color combination, so I'm going to try to rework it. The problem with doing what I do and applying my painterly skills to the work is I can't just work with 5 or 10 colors. I have to at least work with at least maybe 45 different colors.
I've seen this. I've seen pictures of this. All these little balls just rolled up, and like I said, if you guys get a chance, definitely jump on to Marlowe's Facebook page. He also is on Instagram, and we can also provide that information to check out some of his pieces. But with those pictorial imageries, a lot of time you see them in, for example, European textile work, where they have different types of looms that accommodate the many different types of colors. For Marlowe's, since he's using the traditional Navajo loom, you see these little balls of colors just strung out throughout his weaving sitting place. I do notice that you have a cat often with you. Does your cat bother um, your your wool? That's one of my questions.
No, you know what? It's so funny because when I get into my zone when I'm working, the cat she loves it. She will come and sit with me. And this is what I keep right here. And so when I need pieces of a color that I don't know I have, I sort through these and I put them into the rug just to get shading and stuff.
Awesome, Marlowe. Well, Marlowe, thank you so much for joining us today. We truly appreciate it. I guess one of the things, if you're familiar with our series, Tall With It Bit, I was hoping that you might be able to, when somebody says that phrase to you, what is something that comes to mind when you hear that phrase, Tall With It Bit?
Um, you know what? I'm a bit embarrassed right now because I
Oh,
don't
don't
speak a
be.
lot of Navajo. I don't speak a lot of Navajo, so there's a lot of things that I'm missing. But I do. One of my son and sister. One thing that she said is, you know what? You can't be lazy. In the morning, you get up, you get things done, no matter what. And so that kind of goes to mind with that for me.
No, absolutely, 100%. Marlo, if somebody wanted to get in contact with you to purchase one of your paintings or one of your rugs, what would be the best way to do that?
Through Facebook,
Through Facebook?
definitely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and we'll connect that to our video when we post that out. I wanted to let everybody know once again, thank you for letting me be on Facebook Live like this. I hope you guys were paying much more attention to Marlo than to my face. I got into a sheep accident where I got headbutted, and so we're waiting for that to heal up. But we wanted to let you guys know that we will be doing a raffle. We are consistently collecting surveys on getting our public's feedback on the lecture, about the areas that Marlo spoke about. And so we strongly encourage you guys to submit those surveys. If you take a look in the Facebook Live link, you can access those surveys right now. So I strongly encourage that you do that. When you submit that to us, it automatically enters you into raffles. We have some wonderful prizes that we give out. A lot of them are made by our artisans and ourselves. Marlo's contributing a painting for next week's raffle that will take place on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. For everybody who submits a survey, you'll be eligible for some NCAP gear. We have some awesome hats that we will be raffling off next week at that time. If you're able to not only contribute a survey, this actually started off last week with Lyndon Sosie's wonderful idea. We would love for you guys to, in addition to completing the survey, but also submit some sort of verification to us. You can email it to us at ncap@dennecollege.edu. You can Facebook it to either myself or Crystal Littleben or the NCAP Facebook page itself. Some sort of verification that you have donated to an organization that is helping out our Navajo people during this COVID-19 pandemic. And so if you're able to do that, you'll be entered into a raffle for one of Marlo's paintings. And so we're really appreciative of Marlo for being able to contribute that to our raffle as well. So if you guys could please do these surveys, we really appreciate it. And we will be back in 2 weeks with a new artist, and we hope that you guys enjoyed today's lecture. If you guys have any questions or you need to reach out to us, be sure that you contact us over at NCAP. NCAP.edu. I'm sorry, NCAP@dennecollege.edu. You can Facebook us as well.
Also, I was going to mention before we go, stay home, wash your hands, stay safe, eat well, drink lots of water, and when you're finally able to see your public servants, thank them for what they do.
Excellent message, Marlo. All right, everybody, we'll leave you guys off with that. Stay healthy, and we will be in touch.
Tegen go be ha den ste, hey, yana, hey, 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 yana.